Welcome back to another episode of Living Vividly. I am Jackie Hedich, your health coach.
I'm Daphne Olivier, the original unconventional dietitian.
Today's episode is important. We're going to break down the newly released dietary guidelines, which have already stirred up a lot of headlines, opinions, and controversy. Instead of reacting to the noise, we wanted to actually read through them and talk through what they really say. We're going to go section by section to share what's changed, what hasn't, where there's nuance, and where the criticism is fair, all through Daphne's lens as a dietitian and my perspective as a health coach and parent. These guidelines definitely feel like a philosophical shift, less obsession with calories and macros, which I don't even think the 2021s were, but that's kind of where the headspace has been, where we can count calories, and more focus on real food, nutrient density, and long-term health. But they're creating a lot of noise.
So the overall takeaway that I think for this set of dietary guidelines as opposed to the previous set, so let's just kind of back up a little bit. Every 5 years, the department, I guess it's the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah. And is the Department of Agriculture always involved as well?
That's a good question.
They were
I'm not
this
sure.
time.
But every 5 years, the Department of Health and Human Services puts out updated guidelines to help guide the American public towards eating healthy. So I think the kind of thing to pay attention to and thing to recognize is that, yes, this is a guideline for all Americans, but obviously not all of Americans need the same nutritional guidelines. I mean, it's very, very personalized, but this is just kind of a general guideline.
Yeah, it's more like a population level guardrail.
Exactly.
Versus individualized plan.
And I mean, I think we can both agree that social media probably guides changes in eating patterns far more than this 5-year update of the guidelines. I mean, social media changes things really quickly.
Yeah, most people don't read these things.
Right. So with that being said, I don't know how much the public actually kind of looks at these as an actual guideline for their own health. Where I think these become much more important is whenever these guidelines are really what's going to shape federal programs. So it's going to have more of an influence on things like the food stamp or the SNAP program, school food lunch program. Those are all federal programs, and they're tied to the guidelines. The average person doesn't really look into this too much, but I think over time it does begin to shape and influence our food choices. With that being said, the quick pros and cons of this is that there is a huge emphasis on eating real food. And we've never seen that in the guidelines before. It's always been, maybe you shouldn't have too much added sugar, but we've never seen the amount of influence on the benefit of eating real unprocessed foods. And while we as nutrition and health professionals have talked about that for a decade, it's never really been reflected in the guidelines. So I think that that's a big positive. One of the downsides is the discussion about alcohol is very, very loose. And I feel like we kind of had it nailed down previously, unless there's research that comes out, which to my knowledge, there has not been any research to say that we can relax alcohol guidelines. If anything, I would say the research is showing more that we should be avoiding alcohol more than we already do. So that part of the guidelines got really
very vague.
Very vague, very relaxed, and they really had it nailed down before. So I don't know what prompted that to be so relaxed.
Do you think that it's more relaxed, or do you think it's vague on purpose? But my thought was, I think the exact wording is consume less alcohol for better overall health. And they talk about people who should avoid it altogether.
Right.
And talk about, the addictive behaviors. Do you think they are trying to say avoid it altogether without upsetting the apple cart, or?
I think they had it pretty well spelled out where it was, exactly what's considered an alcoholic beverage: 4 ounces of wine, 1.5 ounces of alcohol, 12 ounces of beer. That was spelled out, and women should have, I believe it was no more than 1 per day, men no more than 2 per day. And that was very clear. I mean, that was very clear. This has gotten really loose.
The guidelines that they released were it's 10 pages versus last one in 2020 was 68 pages. So it's a lot simpler.
Yeah. So let's kind of go from the beginning and walk through these guidelines. First, the first thing that I think we really have to have a little conversation about is the influence of Robert Kennedy in this guideline. So he's been in office for a year-ish, and like him or not, there's a huge influence from his ideologies reflected in these guidelines. So while this is supposed to look at a 5-year look at what's happened over the past 5 years, it looks like there's been a lot of push over just the past. A lot of push isn't the right word. A lot of influence over what he has been pushing over the past year. So I find that really interesting because it's so drastically different from the previous guidelines, and his influence over the nutrition world has been pretty drastic compared to what we've seen in the past. So I found that to be really, really interesting.
Also, isn't the committee that they put together, it was all really behind closed doors. It wasn't the same methodology as before when putting these together. I know there's been a lot of controversy about like industry, like farm people in the dairy and beef industries. And so is there a conflict of interest that we need to worry about? I believe in most of the stuff that they're saying, but...
Right. So I'm not 100% sure who all was on the committee. I guess that's something we probably should look up. Who was on the committee?
There's some dairy industry people, some beef, some pork.
I've heard that, yes, that the majority of the committee was made up of
7
farmers,
out of 10.
Right, farmers and dairy farmers.
Which I don't think is completely unheard of. You need some representation.
Sure. I think you definitely need some representation, but we need representation from the scientists and researchers and nutrition professionals need to be involved in this, obviously, because we wouldn't think of making tax guidelines without a CPA being involved, so
talked about earlier how these guidelines really help influence like policy and like this definitely feels like more of a consumer facing manifesto where it's written for the people, which is probably why they kept it to 10 pages, because who's going to sit through 68 pages of graphs and statistics.
So let's walk through the beginning. The first part is eat the right amount for you. So this is where it becomes very, very personalized. So, the calories depend on your age, sex, height, weight, and level of activity. Sure. Pay attention to portion sizes, and hydration is a key factor. That's about as general as you can get, and appropriate, I think. The next part is talking about prioritizing protein, which, again, I do believe that this is an upgrade to what we had before. The previous guidelines discussed protein goals being 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, and there has certainly been research that shows that that is just the amount of protein that you need to be able to survive. It really isn't supportive of longevity, of health, of building muscle, of our older population that needs more protein. So I think that changing the protein goals, essentially doubling the protein goals, I do think is a step in the right direction.
So I've heard some controversy from maybe cardiologists and those people saying that increasing our protein, which, just to backtrack, I do agree that increasing the protein is important, but we've had a lot of pushback with heart health professionals saying that this is going to be too much protein. Do you disagree with that?
I think I hear a lot of the pushback being specific towards saturated fat and red meat, which in this part of the guidelines, it doesn't, it says consume a variety of protein foods from animal sources, eggs, poultry, seafood, and red meat, as well as a variety of plant-sourced protein foods, beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy.
So they're not really pushing beef.
Yeah, it's not red meat specific. They're just putting that as, even as a nutrition professional, if someone's learning about where protein comes from, red meat's in there. So ironically, they don't have pork in here, which I find interesting. And then swap deep fried cooking methods. That seems normal. I mean, I think that unless it says something specific about red meat later in the guidelines, which I don't think it does, I think there's a lot of push towards like
variety.
Yeah, there's a push here. It lays out all of the different types of meats. There's been a spotlight on red meat specific, but it feels a little bit unfair that spotlight has been there.
There's a lot of stuff saying that they just flipped the pyramid upside down. Is there any truth to that?
I mean, if you look at it, it looks a lot like that.
From the image.
Yeah, from the image they did.
But if you actually look at the servings that they're recommending, it doesn't actually represent a pyramid at all.
No. I think the image, I don't think, is a good representation of what the actual words of the dietary guidelines say. And I think that might be a lot of the backlash with the guidelines, is that the pyramid image looks opposite. So it looks like it's completely different from everying else that we've been talking about.
To the old pyramid.
Right. Which I don't necessarily think that's correct. Now, here is something that does, if we're moving down the guidelines, that does create a riff and is different from the previous guidelines. It says, when consuming dairy, include full-fat dairy with no added sugar. That is a huge change to what was previously written in the guidelines. And so
like whole milk instead of 1% skim?
Correct.
Ooh.
Whole full-fat, things like cottage cheese, full-fat yogurt, full-fat cheese. That is very different.
The 90s were all about low fat everything,
right.
And we really started to demonize fat.
Yeah.
And especially whenever you have a young child with a developing brain, like, you need fat.
Yeah.
So
and that started way before the 90s. I was like, you're not an 80s child, but I am. And so that was way in the 80s that we were really demonizing fat. I can remember as a child. And so to remind y'all, I always knew I wanted to be a dietitian. So nutrition was always something that I was paying attention to. But when they started coming out with fat-free sliced like sandwich cheese, it was absolutely awful.
How do you have fat-free cheese?
Awful.
Is there any dairy in it?
Is it cheese
product?
I don't
know. It was like a cheese product. I mean, it was very plasticky. It had no flavor. It looked like cheese, but again, that was way back. We've come a long way with food chemistry and food science since then. But so this push towards dairy is very different from previous. The amount, so dairy serving goals, 3 servings per day as part of a 2,000 calorie dietary pattern, is pretty consistent with what it was before. But the difference here is recommendation of full fat. And so we'll get to the saturated fat conversation because that's another big riff that's happened. But in full fat dairy, it is going to be a fair amount more saturated fat than other types of fats. So it talks here about gut health, which has never been mentioned in the dietary guidelines before. It's just a little slight
an introduction
paragraph, like an intro, but it is something that's different.
Yeah, so they've never really talked about the microbiome before.
Yeah.
It's kind of a new thing that we're talking about. So I'm glad that they put that in there.
Yeah, because the nutrition health world has been talking about the microbiome for a long time. So it's a good little nod in that direction. I thought that was really good. So next, it's talking about eat vegetables and fruits throughout the day. This is no new news. Colorful, nutrient-dense vegetables and fruits in their original form. Frozen, dried, or canned are appropriate. Limiting fruit juice. I don't think this is significantly different from before. Okay, so here's where it starts talking about the fat. So it says incorporate healthy fats, which I think they've always said that. Healthy fats are plentiful in many whole foods, such as meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 rich seafood, nuts, seeds, full-fat dairy, olives, and avocado. All of that is correct. And I think, that's all just foundational nutrition information. When cooking with or adding fat to meals, prioritize oils with essential fatty acids, such as olive oil. That's good. This is a new one. Other options can include butter or beef tallow. That's very different from what we've been told for a very long time.
And no mention of canola oil or any of those other.
Right. No other types of oils are mentioned with the exception of olive oil. Okay, so this is the next part of the fat conversation. In general, saturated fat consumption should not exceed 10% of total daily calories. That's on track with what we've always said.
Well, he did say, RFK recently said, we're going to end the war on saturated fats, and then it's the exact same cap as before. So
right.
That's a very interesting.
Significantly limiting highly processed foods will help meet this goal. So this, if I were a consumer without a nutrition background, trying to interpret these, which I don't know that there are a lot of people really paying much attention to this outside of, the health and nutrition conversations, but this is hard to do. If we're increasing our dairy fat and we're increasing our protein, limiting saturated fat to 10% of calories, it's going to be hard to do.
Yeah, if you follow the recommended servings of all the things that they put in here, you're far exceeding it.
Yeah.
They give us a disclaimer that more high quality research is needed to determine
right
good fats and how they help. I feel like that's almost like a CYA, that's maybe why they haven't changed it.
Quite possibly. And I think there's so much conflict in the world and the research of fats and oils that that does seem kind of like a CYA type thing. Okay, so move into whole grains. This one's significantly different. So prioritize fiber-rich whole grains. That's not different. Reduce the consumption of highly processed refined carbohydrates. I don't know that that's ever actually been said before. White bread, ready-to-eat breakfast options, flour tortillas, crackers, all of those some of those were actually in the visual picture of the pyramid. So this is different from what was written before. And then it says whole grain servings, 2 to 4 servings per day, which is very different from the 6 to 11 servings that was previously recommended.
You know what I find interesting is in most of the other sections, they give you examples of foods that you can eat. And this one, they just don't list anything.
Yeah. So I
had to Google last night, like what actually is a whole grain?
Yeah.
Which is rice, I guess brown rice in this case.
Right. Brown rice, whole
millet?
oats,
Is that how you say
millet.
it?
Yeah. Which if you've never tried millet, you totally should.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I've never had it.
It's like a little seed grain. It's a little bitty dot. I used to serve millet instead of grits whenever we would do
I love grits.
breakfast food for dinner. We'd have millet instead of grits.
Quinoa is one I always forget about.
Yeah.
But I probably should start eating that. Especially with a kid with celiac.
Yeah.
Most of the whole grains have gluten in them.
Yeah. Quinoa, you should put that on your meal plan.
All right.
Okay, so next is limit highly processed foods, added sugar, and refined carbohydrates. So that refined carbohydrates, again, kind of links back to the whole grains and is new conversation for this. Or there's more emphasis on it now than there ever has been before. So the first part here is avoid highly processed, packaged, prepared, ready to eat, or other foods that are salty and sweet, such as chips, cookies, and candy that have added sugar and sodium. I mean, I think we all probably know that that's not healthy, but it's actually listed here. So I find that interesting. Limit foods that include artificial flavors, petroleum-based dyes, artificial preservatives, and low-calorie, non-nutritive sweeteners. That's some fairly new conversation there. So that was not listed before. And avoid sugar-sweetened beverages. But that's been around for a while. So this gives you a little bit of guidelines towards the amount of sugar. While no amount of added sugar or non-nutritive sweeteners. So just to clarify, non-nutritive sweeteners would be things like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin. Those are what were considered non-nutritive sweeteners. So while no amount of added sugar or non-nutritive sweetener is recommended or considered part of a healthy or nutritious diet, one meal should contain no more than 10 grams of added sugar. So that would be 10 grams of added sugar would be equivalent to about 2 tablespoons of ketchup.
It's hard to eat if you're having prepared packaged anything, it's really hard to avoid added sugars.
Yeah. Well,
it's in everything.
Because in food manufacturing, which we'll talk about that in a minute, in food manufacturing, the flavors that the American palate enjoys is sugar, salt or sweetness, salt, and fat. Those are the three flavors. So anytime that something is altered in the processing world, sugar, salt, or fat is added to it so that we can enjoy the flavor of it. So anything that is refined is going to have, not anything, a lot of things that are processed and refined have sugar added to it. So when your diet is based on those foods, as a lot of Americans are, then it's really hard to stay within those sugar guidelines.
So if you get ketchup without added sugar, that's different than what you're talking about.
Ketchup without added sugar is still going to have a sweetener to it. So you can get sugar-free ketchup, but it will have an alternative sweetener to it because ketchup, the way that we know ketchup as Americans, is sweet.
Right. When we say added sugar, we're talking about not sugar that's already in whatever fruit or vegetable that
Correct.
It will be labeled as added sugar, not just sugar.
Well, so
Not
it might
necessarily.
be, in fact, the next section says to help identify sugar, look for ingredients that include the word sugar, syrup, or anything ending in ose. It could be high fructose corn syrup, agave syrup, corn syrup, fructose, glucose, dextrose, sucrose, so many.
The way that ketchup works, so we're talking about ketchup specifically, and I would probably put barbecue sauce into the same category. They're going to be sweetened. It's
Primal
either going to
Kitchen
have
is the only one that doesn't.
It's either going to have high fructose corn syrup. That's traditionally what ketchup has. If it's natural ketchup, then it will have sugar or some other type of sugar that's not high fructose corn syrup, but still sugar. If it's sugar-free, then it's going to have sucralose is usually the one that's added.
Artificial.
Stevia is new, but it's going to have another sweetening source. It's just not going to be high fructose corn syrup or sugar.
And we have learned that there are good sweetener alternatives that we should look for.
Right. So the ones at this point in the research that's appear to be
Ever-changing.
non-problematic
Stevia.
are stevia,
Which
monk
is
fruit.
disgusting.
Yeah, but it might be good in ketchup. It's
good
not
if you
good in
have
soda.
diabetes.
Yeah.
Stevia, monk fruit, and allulose are the three that are
Allulose.
allulose.
Do we know that as something else, or is it?
Nope, it's just
gonna be
allulose.
listed
And you can get it as a sweetener. I haven't seen it. I'm trying to think if I've seen it in the food supply at all. I don't think I've seen it in the food supply, but it is a sweetener that you can get to sweeten your tea or coffee or whatever you want to sweeten.
Well, the Primal Kitchen organic and unsweetened ketchup has no sweeteners at all. I think I've had it before and I don't think I hated it, but I'm also used to disgusting
Ketchup.
like healthy foods now.
Yeah.
Tomato concentrate, white balsamic vinegar, salt, garlic powder, onion powder, spices.
Ooh,
That's it.
interesting. We've talked about the alcohol part where it's just a little vague. Sodium is the next part. Sodium and electrolytes are essential for hydration. Previously, I'm pretty sure sodium was the only thing that was listed. It doesn't get much more here, but they do say the word electrolytes, which is different. Electrolytes are needed. Sodium has been the only electrolyte that's ever really been talked about in the past. And this has, the breakdown for how much sodium you should consume. So less than 2,300 milligrams per day that hasn't changed. That's the same.
Is there a more than?
Well, the average consumer consumes about 5,000 milligrams of sodium.
Oh, so it's
what is
easier to say less than.
Yeah, what's considered healthy is less than 2,400
Less than half of what
milligrams.
you're doing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And kind of a different way to think about this, because sometimes when people are concerned with sodium, 2,300 milligrams sounds like a lot. So I've had people say, well, I don't want to eat something that's got 30 milligrams of sodium in it. Well, the way that I usually talk about it is if we're breaking 2,300 milligrams into 3 meals, then each meal can have, for the sake of math, approximately 800 milligrams of sodium. So if you're concerned about something with 30 milligrams of sodium, you shouldn't be. If you're concerned about something that has 600, 700 milligrams of sodium, that's a different story. So I find that people kind of cherry pick the things that they want to be concerned about when it comes to sodium. But if we're looking at the guidelines, so if I'm going to assume the guideline is 2,400 milligrams, just for the sake of easy math, then 800 milligrams per meal is sounds very liberalized. And you can easily do that if you're not consuming a lot of processed foods.
Right. No snacking in between.
Yeah.
I wanted to look this up just to see like how much sodium is in chicken. It says in a cup there's 115 milligrams.
In just chicken? Like
in a cup
unsalted chicken
Yep.
has sodium?
I mean, that's what it says.
I'm sure that it has natural sodium in it just because, we just talked about electrolytes and sodium being important for muscles. We didn't talk about that exactly, but so there would be some natural sodium in it, but also with a lot of chicken, it's injected with the sodium.
Like a preservative
brine type thing.
How much did I say?
115.
115.
Which is still not
much. Again, if we're looking at 800 milligrams as being kind of the cap for a meal, 100 for a cup of chicken is not much. But if you look at the sodium content of, say, healthy crackers like Wheat Thins.
Right.
Let's look at that.
It looks like it's the same between meats. It's between like 100 and 150 per 100, like every, 200 to 210 milligrams per serving.
Yeah.
In Wheat Thins. Okay. So that's in, I think,
16 crackers.
16 crackers. Okay.
11 to 16 crackers, yeah.
And if you look at the sodium that's in, say, an ounce of cheddar cheese.
Wait, in the Wheat Thins that are labeled as hint of salt, there's about 25% as much sodium.
Okay. So it's less.
174 milligrams of sodium in one slice of cheese.
Okay.
Wait, say that again?
174 milligrams of sodium in one slice of cheddar cheese.
So more sodium in a slice of cheddar cheese than in a cup of ground chicken.
Yes.
That's wild.
So, and it's because of the processing part of it.
Yeah.
So
is that a preservative thing? Or is that, okay.
Yeah. So when we're talking about sodium specifically, we have to look at like everything that you're going to put on your plate. The more that something is moving away from its most natural form, the more sodium it's going to have. So as an example, if we're looking at beans, dried beans would have virtually very little sodium. Canned beans, in the processing of it, because canning, even if it's just beans, canning is still going to be, it's a process that happens. Not to say you shouldn't have them, but as you can it, it's going to have more sodium in it.
To go back to the ketchup thing, in 1 tablespoon of ketchup, 154 milligrams. So again, more than that cup of chicken in just a tablespoon of ketchup. So you're like, oh, I'm being healthy. Let me dip it in ketchup. Ruining it right there.
Yeah.
Especially if you're watching your sodium. I mean, that's the main thing.
Right. We all should
Which
be
apparently
watching
everybody
a little
should.
bit. But
if you're not watching it, go crazy.
But if you're hydrating a lot and working out a lot, don't you use up that sodium?
You do. And I think it all
question.
boils down to how much processed food you're consuming. So if you're consuming a real food diet, then the amount of sodium that you consume is likely not going to be excessive. It's when we start adding in the breakfast cereal and the sliced bread and the cheese on the sliced bread for your sandwich and, the tortilla chips or the corn chips that you go to at the Mexican restaurant. When we start adding all of those things up, that's where it gets to be excessive.
So really all of this can be fixed is if you just in general eat healthier.
Which is the main message on the front page of these is just the message is eat more real food.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I mean. Not eat
lower
healthier.
Lower your processed food consumption and that will
solve so many problems.
Create improvements.
Well, and to be fair, as nutrition professionals, we've been talking about this for decades.
Your whole career.
This is not new.
Why didn't you tell us something?
Okay, so the remaining of these guidelines goes into special populations. So infancy and early childhood.
Something I found really, really, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but they talk about introducing peanut butter to babies around 4 to 6 months, which is different. It used to be 12 months.
Right. And so the research, and again, this has been research from a long time ago, the research has shown that if you introduce it earlier, the likelihood of developing an allergen is less. Yeah. So the research is showing that earlier introduction is less likely to create allergies, which is drastically different from what we've been told.
But also true for pretty much everything. So it's like, come on.
Yeah.
It's very intuitive, I think.
So infancy and early childhood, It talks about introducing foods to infants and toddlers, and pretty basic as far as they should be introducing food when they can sit up alone or without support, when they can control their head and neck.
You get that. Yeah, you get that lesson when you have a baby. They kind of tell you that.
Yeah, when you're a first-time parent, you
get a handbook.
Yeah.
When your kid says, make me a sandwich,
they're ready.
You make that kid a sandwich.
So then we move to middle childhood, which is ages 5 to 10. And the focus is on whole, nutrient-dense foods, full-fat dairy, and that's for brain development, avoiding caffeinated beverages. No amount of added sugar is recommended.
Novel.
And make cooking meals fun and a regular part of the household's routine.
I love that. As a mom,
yeah,
I think that is so fundamental to create healthy habits into adulthood, is just to make food conversations and just have a healthy relationship with food from childhood and learn these habits early.
The more that you can get kids involved with food preparation, whatever it is, washing grapes, cleaning carrots. I mean, the more you can get involved with it, the more likely they are to develop a good relationship with food.
100 years ago, they didn't care what guidelines said to eat.
People just have guidelines.
Ate intuitively and they ate seasonally, and just it was part of life. And we have, in my opinion, really overcomplicated so much. But we've we've gotten ourselves to this point with this chronic disease epidemic that we're facing in this country, where we're all jacked up. So we have to overcomplicate it and I guess now simplify it so that people can understand it. But it's insane to me how
every once in a while I'll get somebody in my office and they're like, this really isn't that hard. I'm like, no, it isn't. We've made it really, really difficult, but eating real food is not that hard. It is more complicated now to get real food. And there are so many demands and expectations that I'm not saying, I wouldn't say that all of this is easy necessarily, but in concept, it's very simple.
Right. It's simple, not easy.
Simple. Yeah.
We've definitely made it giving us so much convenience and prepackaged food, and that, of course, we're addicted to it. It's so hard to go back to real food when you've had these highly palatable, salty, sweet, fat foods, because our brains are like, give me the crackers and whatever. But if we just break the addiction to that, especially in our kids, like I have way more hope for them if they start off eating this way versus me, a 90s latchkey kid. I was eating microwave mac and cheese because my mom was working, so it'll be easier for them to eat this way, I think.
So a couple of things that I would like to say about that. One is I will be interested to see how the food industry responds to these guidelines. So if we are getting the food industry that is putting more focus on real food with less processing, and if that is what comes of these guidelines, I'd feel like huge success.
Yeah.
That's not what our food industry does. And from 70s, 80s through the 90s, I mean, the pendulum has swung so far to one side as far as the processing of food and the access to food that we have that's so highly processed. If we can get that pendulum to swing back just a little bit, I think that would be a huge success. The other thing that is with that pendulum swing, for so long, it's been so highly processed that we have generations of children and kids who are now growing and adults who don't know how to cook anything, and have relied on only convenience foods for so long that they have not been introduced to real foods. I can't tell you how many people I have in my office that they can name you maybe a handful of vegetables and have tasted a few of them, but it's not a part of their routine. And so now we're looking at trying to change, and it's possible, but it's a much harder thing to change someone's ideology about food whenever they were not introduced to anything that is nutritionally supportive. So I think the chronic disease epidemic that we have is going to continue to get worse. And then, this is such a long process of seeing how things change that if we continue on this path of promoting and pushing and the food industry producing real food, we could potentially see it come back, but we're not talking about the next 5 years, whenever the next guidelines come out. It's going to be a long time. It will be decades. And in the midst between that, unfortunately, I think we've lost a lot of people in their desire and ability to revert back or revert to, because they didn't ever leave it and come back, but revert to eating real food.
Sad, but very true.
Salt, fat, sugar. Those are innate, or are those
that's what
acquired?
Our little brains want.
That's what excites our taste buds. Innately, as a human, sugar is something that has always lit up parts of our brain. Okay, so like way back. Period. Way back in the day, that sugar came from things like honey and berries, and those things were exciting. And fast forward to now, we have those sugar flavors in just about everything. I mean, there's, whether it's fruit, or even our fruit has more sugar in it than it did back then. Mm-hmm. But we're getting that sugar in such a variety of places. It's still lighting up part of your brain, but there are still, taste preferences too. Okay. So that does play a role here. I'm going to say for young girls, allowing food to be, not having too many like no foods. You can't have that. It depends on the personality, honestly. I feel like it really does have a big dependence on the personality. That when you tell someone that they can't have something, whether it's a child or an adult, that's the first thing that they want to have. And I've seen this just kind of anecdotally.
Rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this in friends who have daughters. Reason number 563 why I'm glad I don't have a daughter. So I have seen that anecdotally, like I said, in family friends who have daughters, where the parents have been very, very, very strict. And when the daughter leaves and goes somewhere where they might have, it starts, and
it's an unhealthy relationship with food.
Secretive, poor relationship with food and what's allowed and what's not allowed. So that is a very fine line. That's a whole nother conversation that we could have for another day.
When dealing with children, I mean, I have young kids right now. So having these conversations, explaining to them why I want them to eat certain ways, talking about nutrient density and focusing on protein and this full fat dairy for their brain development, explaining to them, well, first of all, I'm so excited that they're talking about nutrient density in regards to children, and no amount of sugar is recommended. Like, of course, I let my kids have a cookie or some ice cream. I'm not going to totally withhold that, but we talk so much about the nutrients and what they do for their bodies and why the protein is important. And I think these conversations are so important for kids to understand why food is important. And I like to give my kids the reason for why they do things.
You're also a very involved parent, and that's not the case for a vast majority of our adolescents.
Well, most people are just busy and they're juggling a lot of things, and it's not like a judgment thing at all. I am arguably too involved sometimes. They would love for me to back off a little bit, but I guess that is true.
I mean, there are plenty of people that have for themselves. I mean, so we're again kind of entering into a generation where the parent wasn't taught much about nutrition and grew up on, highly refined, ultra processed foods. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to prepare meals. And now they're raising kids. And so even if they wanted to have the conversation, they don't fully have the verbiage to be able to have that conversation.
I had this conversation with my daughter either last night or this morning, actually. She said, so-and-so, every single day, she brings chips, a Lunchable, and M&Ms to school for lunch. She's mortified by it, and she's just trying to wrap her head around, like, why? And I said, not everyone has the knowledge and the understanding that we have, and we're lucky that that this is my obsession, but not everyone understands that. Not everyone grew up this way. And so hopefully the fact that this is very simple and 10 pages, it can start to drop some seeds.
Hopefully. Yeah. Well, and like I said, I think that social media influences our eating patterns way more than the governmental dietary guidelines that have come out. But I do think that we're potentially on the cusp of the pendulum swing. And so this makes me feel hopeful. And really that's all it does, is make me feel hopeful that maybe we will switch and turn the table so that we are focused on actual real food.
But I also think if we can get into some of the controversy, which I know we still have a few pages, but it's those special populations.
Yeah, so we go into young adults where it's basically saying kind of the same thing. Like we're really still looking at brain development into a young adulthood. It doesn't have an age for young adulthood.
Anything past 18? Because adolescence is 11 to 18 when they start, it talks about rapid growth, increasing your protein, increasing
So it's talking about brain health, bone density, which rarely ever gets talked about, especially in this age population. Following the dietary guidelines that can support reproductive health for both men and women. So I think those are all good, again, very general, but good information. There's a section here on pregnant women and the increased need for iron, folate, and iodine as priorities. There is some information here about iron-rich meats, folate-rich greens and legumes, which those are very vague, choline-rich eggs, calcium-rich dairy. So these are all, again, kind of the most basic foundational parts for pregnant women. Lactating women, not a whole lot different. I mean, it's talking about your B-rich, B12-rich foods and eggs and dairy, omega-3 rich seafood. So not significantly different from pregnant women. And then it goes into older adults. So older adults may need fewer calories, but still require key nutrients such as protein, vitamin B12, vitamin D, and calcium.
It's saying fewer calories, but equal or greater amounts of those nutrients.
Vitamin D they have in here. I find that very interesting because while they probably do need more vitamin D, we're not getting a lot of vitamin D from our food. There's just not a lot of foods that have vitamin D in them.
We're going to talk about chronic disease, which is very interesting that they're talking about a low-carb diet might help individuals with certain chronic diseases.
For the dietary guidelines, I'm surprised they have anything about supplements in it.
It is very vague. I mean, it just says when dietary intake or absorption is insufficient, fortified foods or supplements may be needed under medical supervision. So very, very vague. So individuals with chronic disease, if you have chronic disease, talk with your healthcare professional to see if you need to adapt the dietary guidelines to meet your specific needs. So that does,
CYA.
It's a little bit of nod to, personalization, but I think it should be a little more specific about what type of healthcare professional you should talk to because many healthcare professionals are not going to be able to guide you in any direction, or they're going to give you the information that they saw on TikTok.
Please see a unconventional dietitian about your personal needs.
I can't treat the whole world.
Just have to get more people under you.
Yeah. And so, like you said, it says that certain chronic diseases may experience improved health outcomes when following a lower carbohydrate diet. So that's just kind of like, I feel like a bomb that was dropped there with not much to support it.
Yeah. It's almost annoying how short this is.
Yeah.
Because although, I've heard that there's like 60 and 90 page documents that were supplements to this, so they weren't.
I'm sure there's more to it than just this. This is the Cliff Notes version. And then the last part here talks about vegetarians and vegans. Consume a variety of whole foods, especially protein-rich foods. Significantly limit high processed vegan or vegetarian food. So that's a really
Beyond
important
Burger,
thing for the vegetarians and vegans.
I was a vegetarian for years. I was a failed vegan, but I did vegetarian for a little over 5 years, I think. During that time and up until my pregnancy, unfortunately, I was so nutrient deficient and just very unhealthy, very inflamed. I ate a lot of French fries.
Well, so I was going to say being vegetarian or vegan,
it's hard for me to say. So purposeful.
Yeah, there are ways to do it, the vast majority of people who are following a vegetarian diet for the sake of health are really not prioritizing nutrients. And so one thing in here is that it has a list of nutrients that could potentially be problematic for people who are vegan and vegetarian. So I think that's interesting. It doesn't give you any guidance in this particular handout.
What do you mean problematic? Like you'd be deficient in?
You would be deficient in.
Yeah, you're probably going to be deficient in D, E, choline, iron, all
magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, protein.
So
B12. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah. So basically you have to survive off a multivitamin.
Well, so there are ways for someone who is well versed in vegetarianism, which I am not. There are ways to do it, but you have to be, like you said, very purposeful and very intentional in how you plan and structure your eating patterns.
Gosh, that sounds like more than a full-time job.
I mean, some people are that committed.
Yeah.
And it is completely possible because we have an insane gluten thing in our house. So every single thought that I have all the time is avoiding that, making sure I have alternatives, making sure she's getting enough nutrients because her absorption problem. So you can just do that with vegetarian,
right.
So it is doable, but it consumes all my thoughts.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And that's it.
So that's the end of the dietary guidelines.
My first thought was, okay, so whole grains, I thought we were avoiding those. We have all these marketing products that are marketing. It's grain-free. Whole30 is telling you not to eat grains at all. Mm-hmm. Why are we avoiding them?
Okay.
And then why are they also recommended?
Okay, so part of the conversation with whole grains is that the reason that they're recommended is because they do contain nutrients. They do have a nutritional value. All grains are going to be very carbohydrate dense. So if we're looking at the macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbs, all grains fall under the umbrella of carbohydrates. So for that reason, a lot of people avoid grains because they're trying to, following lower carb diets, keto diets, that sort of thing. That's part of it. Whole grains have, for lack of a better way to describe it, a husk on them. Okay. So the way that I will always describe it, because I think people can visualize this, is that if we were going to take a peanut in a shell, the whole grain would be like the actual peanut and the shell that surrounds it.
I think it's called a bran.
Yes.
But yes,
bran,
the outside of it.
Yeah. Not B-R-A-N-D. So that would be the whole grain. In that husk, that shell, there are some what are sometimes referred to as anti-nutrients. So there are nutrients, there's where fiber is found there, but there are some things that can prevent the absorption of nutrients also.
Interesting.
So a lot of times that's where you'll see, if you're getting into nutrient density, a lot of times that's where you'll see grains that need to be soaked for a little while. So not just beans, but the same way that we soak beans, grains also can be soaked with a little bit of vinegar or a little bit of baking soda to remove some of those anti-nutrients on the grains. So that is a thing. But the grains that we primarily eat as Americans are not whole grains, they are refined grains. So similar to, we're in South Louisiana, a whole grain would be brown rice. The refined version of that is white rice, which is what most people are eating. And again, white rice is the same thing as brown rice. It just has that outer shell, that husk that's been removed. And that's where some of the fiber and some of the other nutrients are. So from a carbohydrate perspective, which there's so much focus on carbohydrates, that's why I would bring this up. The brown rice and the white rice are virtually the same. Again, a little bit more carbohydrates in brown rice because it has that fiber. So if you're looking at labels, the carbohydrate number might be slightly higher, but what is available for your body to utilize is about the same in brown rice and white rice.
The added fiber, does that kind of counteract some of that?
Potentially.
Like you have an insulin resistance problem.
So if you have insulin resistance or any kind of blood sugar handling, they're about the same. They're going to affect your blood sugar very, very similarly.
Rice is recommended.
Yeah.
Would quinoa be a good alternative, or is it about the same?
About the same. So quinoa has this, like foods get popularized for a particular
I've heard
thing.
It has complete protein or something.
Quinoa has a little bit more protein in it, but in order for you to get that protein, in order for you to get any amount of protein that is worth talking about, the volume that you need is
bucket of quinoa.
It'd be like a cup of quinoa, I think has 5 grams of protein, which it also has about 40 plus grams of carbohydrates. So it is a higher protein grain in comparison to, say, oats or rice, but not so much that we're going to use quinoa as a protein source if we're trying to balance macronutrients.
Which I was when I was a vegetarian, side note. So
it really, I think all of it, whole grains are better than refined grains without a doubt. But to say that we need to significantly increase our whole grains, I don't think is true. I think, and it really all depends on what your goals are. So if your goals are managing blood sugar and insulin resistance and weight loss, then whole grains, we still have to pay attention to portion sizes. So whole grain would be better than refined grain, yes. Portion of either one of them is also still really important.
So they're recommending, I think, 2 to 4 servings of whole grains per day, but we're not talking 2 to 4 cups of rice.
Right. So what's considered a serving is anywhere from 1/3 of a cup to 1/2 of a cup is considered a serving of whole grains, depending on what grain we're talking about.
Okay. So I got a couple more questions before we wrap up. Seed oils. They didn't talk about it at all, but they did explicitly mention olive oil, beef tallow, and butter.
Right.
And we've found out those are the good ones, right? Or olive oil.
Olive oil has never been disputed.
Yeah.
Olive oil has always been top of the list for any type of oil that you consume. The beef tallow and butter are different. That's new in this guidelines.
That's what we originally cooked with.
Right. And they are going to be more saturated fat heavy. So,
but they didn't mention avocado oil, which bums me out.
If I were to guess, I would say that there's too much conflicting research for them to explicitly say that.
So they don't want to touch it yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would suspect over the next, maybe in 2030, 2035, it's coming. It's just not here yet.
Got it.
Oh, so there's no negative research. It's just not enough positive yet.
I think there's both.
Okay, so we talked about the saturated fat and how the so-called war on saturated fat was coming to an end, but it's the same.
I think that this kind of blurs it a little bit because it's still giving us from a very specific numbers guideline. It's still saying 10%, but it's also including high fat or full fat dairy, butter, and tallow, which are higher in saturated fat. Now, there's a lot of controversy about the beef situation, and there's nothing really in here that explicitly says, with the exception of beef tallow, that explicitly says
eat more beef.
We need to eat more beef. So I'm not sure.
Maybe we need to read the other 60, 90 page documents with all the...
Why don't you do that and report back?
Yes. We will break that down later.
What's your view on saturated fat? Like, what is the view that you were hoping to see in this?
That the demonization of saturated fat, meaning in like the 70s, 60s, late 60s, early 70s, there was a push against saturated fat, and I think that was unwarranted.
You can have too much saturated fat.
I think, yes. I think you can have too much saturated fat.
Have too much of anything, I guess.
But the amount that is needed or the amount that is healthy is still, I think, very controversial.
Okay. So do you think they're on the right track by saying, here's where, if you're going to eat saturated fat, there are good saturated fats? Do you think that's going in the right direction?
I think, yes. I do think we're on the right track.
Is it because we're just not going backwards?
My concern, I'll tell you my concern, is that anytime that we say that something is good, it always gets overdone, and
too much
anything,
of a good thing.
Yeah, like the keto diet, bacon's good. Well, we've got people that are eating just like pounds of bacon. Things are always taken out of context. Yeah. So to say that butter is, as a saturated fat, is better than margarine, yes, I believe that is correct. To say that beef tallow is better than Crisco, yes, I believe that to be correct. If we're going to start like smearing beef tallow on bread and eating it, that's not a good thing. I don't think that is a step in the right direction. I have been doing beef tallow on my face, though.
You finally got over your aversion to the smell.
I did. So I think it is a push in the right direction, but if it's not taken out of context.
Yeah.
So 10% of calories from saturated fat,
which is the same,
which is, I believe, is the same as the previous dietary guidelines, is
less than 200 calories a day.
Yeah, I mean, it's to be able, that's going to be a hard thing to do.
So do you think, okay.
But
so
I also,
do you think
no one's looking at how much saturated fat they eat. I mean,
right.
Unless you're tracking everything that you're eating in a food tracking app, which some people do, but I mean, it's a very small percentage of the population. You don't know how much saturated fat you're eating.
Gotcha. So you're not saying it's unhealthy to eat more than that. You're saying it's just almost impossible to eat healthy and eat less than...
I think if we're pushing full-fat dairy and we're pushing higher protein, then it's going to be hard. So if your protein comes from chicken and fish and shellfish, if that's where your increase in protein is coming from, then it's, you probably can do it. If your protein is coming from every day, I want to have even like a sirloin steak, which is your leanest steak, it's going to be hard. So there are ways to do it. But it's, I think we're getting really nuanced.
Yeah, and also, we go back to, this is not individualized. Some people may need 10% or less. Some people may be okay with 18% or whatever the case is.
And there is research that shows that it's not as much saturated fat that is causing heart disease as it is the amount of sugar that we're consuming as Americans. I mean, that research is there.
Same about salt. I've heard don't blame salt for what sugar did.
Yes.
All these like hypertension problems.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think if I'm going to demonize something, I'm always going to go sugar first, even though as much as I love sugar.
Yeah.
That I think is much more of a problem in our diets than, an average amount of saturated fat. That's just my personal.
And they talk all about lowering your sugar.
Yeah. This feels like it's a step in the right direction. But what?
Yeah.
It's 11:30?
No, it's 11:06. We've been talking for barely over an hour.
An hour and 23 minutes.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll wrap it up.
An hour and a half is an hour and 30 minutes, so we're not quite there yet. So, like I said, I think that this is a step in the right direction. I am very interested to see how the food industry responds to this by way of the products that they start producing. That's what I think is like the next really interesting step.
I'm also very interested to see how the media continues to absorb this. I think that there's pushback just because of who it came from.
Absolutely.
And there's people that are just going to reject it, period.
Absolutely.
And maybe there were some conflicts of who was on the committee and all that, but I don't think you can argue with most of what they're saying. But that's not going to stop anybody.
Yeah. In general, I do think that this is a big step forward. I feel confident.
Thanks for listening to Living Vividly. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. For more resources and details from today's discussion, check out the show notes. Until next time, keep living vividly.